For more than a year now, we've been exploring the origins and the history of Japan's Yakuza crime syndicates. Their story took us an impressive 400 years into the past, going from humble beginnings as gamblers and peddlers to experiencing a meteoric rise to power starting in the early 1900s. But moving away from the island nation of Japan to mainland Asia, we encounter yet another collection of criminal organizations known for engaging in activities and violence similar to the Yakuza, but arguably boasting an even richer origin story. The roots of the Chinese Triads are even more deeply intertwined with the fabric of their country's history and politics than that of their Japanese counterparts. And not only that, but their story takes us back in time much, much further. The Triads trace their roots back not hundreds, but thousands of years, slowly, almost with Zen-like patience, developing from non-criminal, in some cases pretty harmless societies into crime syndicates that eventually managed to steer their country's fate as they saw fit. So today, join me on a journey to mainland China, on a quest to explore the insanely long history of the Chinese Triads, one of the most well-known and infamous collections of criminal organizations in history, while probably butchering the pronunciation of every single Chinese word or name that I happen to come across. Apologies in advance to all Mandarin or Cantonese speaking viewers. Should you, despite a lack of Chinese speaking skills from my side, enjoy this video, then help me out by hitting that like button, and make sure to subscribe in order to not miss out on any future content, which might include more videos about the Triads at some point. Think I deserve even more of your support? Check out my Patreon page, linked below and in the description, to help me out with as little as $1 per month. Now, let's get started. These are the origins and the early history of the Chinese Triads. To find the earliest traces of what we now know as the Triads, we go back to the year 23 AD and the demise of Wang Mang, the founder and only emperor of the short-lived Qin dynasty. The death of Wang Mang and the subsequent end of the Qin dynasty was the result of an attack on the capital city, Chang'an, preceded by a series of revolts and rebellions plotted in large parts by a group known as the Qimei, or Red Eyebrows. The Red Eyebrows were a so-called secret society, led by a patriotic leader by the name of Fan Zhong, and known for painting their eyebrows red for intimidation purposes. And, you know, because it looks cool. The story of the Red Eyebrows, a secret society which played an integral role in bringing down an entire dynasty, was one of, if not the first of its kind, at least in recorded history. But rebellious uprisings like these were not a rare occurrence. In fact, rebellion had always been a big part of China's long, complicated, and fascinating history. Though revered as a divine figure, the Chinese emperor wasn't exactly untouchable or anything, because his subjects still held him accountable for his actions. Should an emperor fail to fulfill his heavenly duties, the people were almost expected to take action and get rid of him. Natural disasters like floods, earthquakes, droughts, and the likes could also be considered as ominous signs that the emperor had enraged the gods by not fulfilling his duties. If you think of it that way, the Red Eyebrows actually served their country well. They were ultimately decimated by a military force belonging to the succeeding dynasty that they had helped establish in the first place, though. But the tradition of secret societies endured for centuries, driven by more than just political or patriotic aims. Often they arose from a deep yearning for connection and community, especially during turbulent times. And no one craved this more than the peasants, the rice growers, the metal workers, the livestock farmers, who formed the backbone of China's dynasties despite being constantly underpaid, underappreciated, and exploited. Discontent wasn't limited strictly to the peasantry, though. There was a growing number of well-educated Chinese citizens who dreamt of one day joining the esteemed ranks of the civil servants, also known as the mandarins. Most of them, however, found themselves failing the rigorous exams and facing an uncertain future. In order to even be allowed to compete for a spot as a Mandarin, you had to be incredibly literate and intelligent. But out of the hundreds of thousands of applicants that took their chance each year, only a handful of them could actually make it, creating a large pool of incredibly smart, but ultimately unemployed and most of all frustrated citizens who, just like the peasants, were kind of fed up with their government and the system as a whole. In search of solidarity, both the disillusioned peasant class and the rejected civil servants found common ground, their frustrations with their country's power structure naturally leading them to form societies, which, as their political involvement grew and their criticism of the government intensified, had to become increasingly discreet about their activities. As you can imagine, dissent was met with nothing but sheer force by the government, and so these societies had to become secret societies. And in order to stay secret, loyalty was of utmost importance. Initiation rituals were used to impose religious as well as moral obligations upon new recruits, which were drawn from 3 different religions and philosophical foundations, namely Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism. Taoism especially, placing a lot of value on things like harmony, loyalty, and respect for family and ancestors, proved particularly useful in fostering a sense of secrecy and solidarity within these societies. These religions also proved to be a natural fit for China's secret societies for an entirely different reason though. Frequent crackdowns on Taoism and Buddhism throughout history inadvertently pushed their followers underground, with secret societies becoming sanctuaries that preserved these faiths during long periods of persecution. There were, for example, the Yellow Turbans. With a close association to then secret Taoist societies, they managed to start a revolt in 184 AD, which brought with it immense change for China. While the uprising was suppressed fairly quickly, the ruling Han dynasty was severely weakened, leading to its eventual downfall and later the beginning of the Three Kingdoms period of China. Buddhism was also banned on multiple occasions, like in 845 when Emperor Wuzong of the Tang dynasty shut down a total of 4,600 Buddhist monasteries and 40,000 temples and shrines across China. Naturally, the Buddhist population had to go underground and form secret societies. And it was during this persecution in particular that many of the symbolisms and rituals still associated with the Triads to this day were established. The secret societies proved resilient. Not only did they survive, they thrived as China grappled with a series of historical turning points. A prime example of which came in the late 13th century, when the Mongols under Kublai Khan ascended to power, taking over as the new rulers and marking the beginning of the Yuan dynasty. Resentment against the Mongol rule obviously simmered among the Chinese populace, particularly in the south of the country, which served as the last stronghold of the previous Song dynasty. Many harbored loyalty to the deposed emperor, but these feelings didn't manifest into something substantial until a rebel alliance led by 3 leading powers was established, among them a certain group founded almost 1,000 years earlier, the Bailian, or White Lotus Society. In 1344, a resurgence of the White Lotus Society under 4 charismatic leaders fueled a rebellion led by the so-called Red Turban Army, which ultimately toppled the Mongol Yuan dynasty, ushering in the nearly 3-century reign of the Ming dynasty. The White Lotus Society remained a persistent force throughout the Ming dynasty. Their influence only began to wane as the 17th century progressed and the Qing dynasty, China's final imperial dynasty, took hold. It was also this shift in power that led to the society's inclusion on a government list of banned organizations. While the White Lotus Society's prominence faded, it didn't disappear entirely. Their final historical mention under this name comes from an 1814 rebellion. Following this event, the society underwent a significant transformation, merging with yet another secret society which had long been outlawed by the Qing government, the Tiandi Hui, alternatively known as Hongmen, or simply Hong Society. The White Lotus Society continued to exist under many different names. In later years, they adopted the moniker Sanhou Hui, meaning Triple Unit Society, reflecting their belief in the interconnectedness of heaven, earth, and humanity. Though the origins of the modern term Triads remain debated, some believe that this exact concept is where it originally came from. A different theory suggests that British authorities in Hong Kong, noticing a recurring use of triangular symbols among local criminal groups, may have coined the term Triads. The use of the triangle symbol reportedly dates back to the mid-1700s and the aforementioned Hong society. Oh, it's also worth noting that while in English and many other languages we use the term triads to describe gangs active mainly in China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, they are referred to in their native country by either their individual names or by more general terms like the Cantonese Hak Se Wei, which translates to black societies. But as interesting as the origin of their name is, let me know in the comments if you got any other theories. I think it's time to really get into the more direct origins of the modern Chinese crime syndicates. And to do that, we have to take a closer look at the origins of one particular secret society, the aforementioned Hong society. Because even today, the story of its formation serves as the cornerstone of the Triads' traditional narrative. The interesting thing about the Hong societies, and with it the Triads' early history, is the fact that what we are dealing with here is a story which presents a captivating blend of fact and fiction, history and legend, further enriched by a touch of lingering mystery. Now, there is a lot of debate about how and when exactly the Hong Society was born. What seems to be pretty much agreed upon is that the Hong Society traces its roots to the province of Fujian, and to some extent the neighboring Guangdong province. It can also be said with relative certainty that the Hongmen, as they're often called, had been around by the 18th, possibly even the 17th century, starting off as a combination of several patriotic societies that, just like many secret societies that came before them, were unhappy with those who ran a country. More specifically though, the Hong Society members were disappointed with the fact that their beloved Ming Dynasty rulers were replaced by those of the Qing Dynasty in 1644. Not only did they consider the Qing to be quite tyrannical when it came to running the country, but their predecessors, the Ming, belonged to the Han ethnic majority of China, which back then, and to some extent even today, is considered by many to be the quote-unquote true Chinese ethnicity. The Qing, however, were not Han Chinese. Instead, they belonged to a Northeast Asian tribe known as the Manchus. Nothing wrong with that, obviously, but some of China's most patriotic citizens at the time cared to disagree, and often considered the Qing's ethnic origins reason enough to throw some serious shade at them. Now, finding a more precise founding date of the Hong Society is a whole nother story. There are many different versions and opinions out there regarding such a date, but according to actual members of the Hong Society, as well as the Triads' own tales and legends, which to be fair do have to be taken with a grain of salt, one particular historic event marks the true beginning of the Hongmen. The destruction of the Shaolin Monastery at the hands of the 4th Qing Emperor Yin Qian and his army, which occurred sometime during the emperor's reign between 1722 and 1735. The monks of the Shaolin Monastery, brilliant fighters and tacticians by the way, are said to have assisted Yin Qian in defeating a Mongol tribe known as the Ilias. The legends, however, depict the Shaolin monks as harboring secret dissent against the Qing from the get-go, using their reported assistance to the emperor as a strategic move to gain his trust, potentially paving the way for deeper influence within the Qing government, perhaps even through a planted agent. And their plan probably would have succeeded too, if it wasn't for a member of the Qing council who allegedly saw right through the monks' plans. Through persuasion, he painted a picture of the Shaolin monks as a significant political threat to Yin Qian, which then ultimately led to a brutal assault on the Shaolin Monastery. The whole complex was burned down, with not a trace of life remaining where the Shaolin Monastery once stood, except for 5 monks who miraculously managed to survive the fire and escape. These monks, who became known in Triad lore as the 5 Ancestors, were now not just opposed to the Qing government. They were straight up pissed. And according to the legend, it was at this point that they teamed up with other like-minded Ming loyalists, forming the society that we now know as the Hong Society. The Hong Society's motivations are best summed up by a single legendary phrase that has resonated with Triad members for centuries. Qing Fu Ming, roughly translated as "overthrow the Qing, restore the Ming," became not just the Hongmen's motto, but a rallying cry eventually adopted by the Triads as a whole. Even today, whispers of this oath echo during Triad initiation ceremonies, serving as a powerful reminder of the gang's historical roots. As years and decades went by, rebellions and uprising against the Qing government continued on a regular basis, like the White Lotus Rebellion, which erupted in 1794 and raged for a full decade, claiming the lives of an estimated 100,000 rebels. But no matter how many enemies they made, the Qing rulers stayed in power well into the 19th and even into the 20th century, along the way banning and decimating a seemingly endless amount of secret societies that had no shortage of reasons to continue banding together against their government. As China expanded its borders under Qing rulership, the country's population increased at a pace never seen before. In 1700, during the early years of Qing rule, China was home to an estimated 150 million people. But by 1850, at the height of the Qing dynasty, that number had increased to a staggering 450 million people. The country was now dealing with a problem that has plagued China for a long time: overpopulation, which naturally comes with some serious side effects. And for the most part, it was also the population who had to suffer the consequences. China's rapidly growing population placed a significant strain on resources, and farmers especially faced higher taxes and inflation while struggling to produce enough food. Land scarcity caused many rural residents to relocate to unfamiliar areas far away from home, many of whom found a sense of community and support by joining secret societies that also challenged the government's authority. The Hong Society managed to stand out among all the other secret societies due to its more lenient membership requirements, coupled with a multitude of useful services, providing members with financial aid through loans, organizing funerals, regulating businesses, and much more. The Hong Society funded its activities through several means. Wealthy members made donations at temples, and the society collected interests on loans and membership fees, comparable to a month's wages for an average peasant. This price of admission was actually well worth it in the eyes of many peasants and farmers, given the wide selection of services on offer. And with a large and growing membership, estimated in the hundreds of thousands by the early 19th century, secret societies across China often became filthy rich. But with such large membership numbers, the societies also received an increasing amount of attention by the government, forcing them to go even more underground, which in turn made them more desperate, frustrated, and in some cases, dangerous. And that is how criminality ultimately crept its way into the secret societies. Corrupt societies eventually started collaborating with pirates and professional criminals in many different avenues of criminal activity, including theft and illegal gambling, but most importantly, drugs. There is perhaps nothing that transformed the Triad societies, and to some extent China, as much as the introduction of opium, which is believed to have made its way to China as early as the 9th century. Opium quickly saw widespread use by the Chinese population and actually remained legal over the following centuries. That was until the Qing dynasty came along. In 1729, Emperor Yinxian outlawed the non-medicinal use of opium in an effort to curb addiction, followed by the criminalization of both production and import in 1799. But little did he know that this crackdown would ultimately lead to the rise of organized opium smuggling. Generally, the stuff was imported from either Persia or India, since foreign opium was of way higher quality than what the Chinese were able to produce themselves, at least at the time. But it was usually British and French traders that actually brought the drug into China, where foreign trade was limited to one island off the coast of modern-day Guangxu called Lintin Island. Trade on the island had to go through the so-called Kohong, a guild consisting of 8 to 12 merchants with exclusive rights to deal with the foreigners. The Kohong, in a position to simply bribe Qing government officials into ignoring the import of illegal goods, would become an invaluable middleman in the now illegal yet incredibly profitable opium trade between, among others, the East India Company, which pretty much had a monopoly on British trade with China, and Chinese merchants who saw significant financial gain from supplying the ever-growing domestic demand for opium. The criminalization of the opium import also played right into the hands of the Triads. At that point, secret societies consisted of more than just disgruntled, failed civil servants and impoverished and frustrated farmers and peasants. The Triad societies were now home to experienced and armed fighters, as well as pirates who knew exactly how to safely and swiftly transport illegal goods onto shore. The Triads' favorite phrase, "fan Qing Fu Ming," now that opium was the biggest enemy of the Qing government, served as justification and a convenient excuse for the Triads when it came to smuggling the drug into the country, and of course making boatloads of cash while doing so. The illegal opium trade was a well-oiled machine, and throughout the first 3+ decades of the 19th century had grown into both a seemingly unstoppable force, as well as a huge source of frustration for the Qing government. Because while British traders, corrupt Qing government officials, the Kohong, and the Triads were swimming in money, the Chinese population slipped deeper and deeper into a dangerous, widespread addiction, which brought with it serious social and economic issues. The Qing government's frustrations with the illegal opium trade reached a tipping point in 1839, when they got hold of and destroyed 20,000 chests of opium, totaling around 1,400 tons of the stuff. This incident eventually led to the First Opium War, fought between China and Britain, with an eventual victory for the British. The First Opium War had a profound impact on China. The Treaty of Nanjing, signed in 1842, not only ceded Hong Kong to Britain, it also opened 4 additional ports across China to foreign trade. One of these ports was located in Shanghai, which over the next century would become a major commercial center, a prominent base for Triad activities, and the home of what was probably the most influential gang leader in Chinese history. But more on that in a bit. More importantly though, the First and Second Opium War, which followed 14 years after the Treaty of Nanjing was signed, marked the beginning of what would later become known in Chinese history as the Century of Humiliation. An especially difficult period in a country's history, which also saw the eventual downfall of a severely weakened Qing dynasty. You know, the Triad Society's wet dream. Well, unfortunately, that dream had to be fulfilled with the help of 2 of the most significant and brutal events in Chinese history. The first of which claimed an estimated 20 million lives over the span of 14 years. And it all started with what else but a failed civil servant, who believed himself to be the son of God. Religiously motivated secret societies were nothing new at that point. As explained earlier, secret societies were oftentimes the only thing that kept religions like Buddhism and Taoism alive in China over multiple decades, sometimes even centuries. But the Bai Xiangdi Hui, or God Worshipper Society, founded by Hong Xiuqian in 1847, was an entirely different beast. Hong was convinced that he was none other than the brother of Jesus Christ, who was sent to reform China. The God Worshipper Society was composed mainly of poor peasants of Guangxi province, who he first led into rebellion in 1850. A year later, he proclaimed the Taiping Jianguo, or Heavenly Kingdom of Great Peace, a new dynasty with Hong Xiuqian at the helm as Qianwang, or Heavenly King. His promises, including the equal distribution of property amongst the population, coupled with a healthy dose of anti-Qing propaganda, really struck a nerve with peasants, workers, and miners. Membership numbers quickly grew from only a few thousand to more than 1 million fanatic followers who ravaged across China in what became known as the Taiping Rebellion, conquering land in the name of Hong and even capturing the historically important city of Nanjing, renaming it Tianjin, or Heavenly Capital. The Taiping Rebellion was well on its way to actually toppling the Qing dynasty, but was eventually stopped by a combination of internal disputes within the society, followed by several key defeats in battle, most notably in Shanghai. The heavenly capital of Tianjin fell in July of 1864, and by 1868 the Taiping Rebellion had ground to a complete halt, but only after claiming the lives of an estimated 20 million people. Needless to say, the already strained reputation of the Qing government also took a massive hit, which should have been a cause for celebration among Triad societies. But instead, the Taiping Rebellion had them worried. It showed them that foreign Christian missionaries in China, though few in number, could pose a huge threat to the Triad's dominance and future endeavors, should they be able to gain a larger following. After all, the Christians offered an alternative religion to those which were not only closely associated with, but also essential to the Triads. Their whole existence relied on complete loyalty and respect for hierarchical structures, which themselves were closely tied to teachings of clan and family traditions and ancestor worship found in Buddhism and Taoism especially, concepts that were either missing or taught in a completely different manner by Christianity. To further complicate the matter, foreign missionaries usually operated under the patronage of those who were close to the Qing dynasty, an association which would automatically position them at odds with the Triad societies. As a consequence, more and more Triad societies dedicated themselves to an increasing number of not only anti-Christian, but anti-foreign attacks over the following 3 decades, which were met with close to zero resistance by the Qing government, which knew damn well that, having tried to do so many times in the past, had no chance at actually suppressing the Triads. They also did not want to be seen siding with foreigners against their own people, especially given their increasingly shaky reputation among the Chinese who, by the end of the 19th century, were dealing with a seemingly endless amount of problems. Floods, plagues, diseases, combined with foreign aggression, political issues, and a religious divide between the Christian and non-Christian population transformed into a fertile environment for even more trouble, which came in the form of yet another rebellion at the hands of a new, especially violent collection of triads. The Yihe-chan, or Righteous and Harmonious Fists. The Yihe-chan, with rebellious roots dating all the way back to the mid-18th century, became known to Westerners under an entirely different name. Boxers, a reference to the society's love for physical violence, which manifested itself in the practice of a form of martial arts not dissimilar to modern Thai boxing. They considered martial arts to be an important part of their identity, a divine combination of physical fitness and spirituality. They also believed that their initiation rituals, which included the use of certain incantations, made them invincible against their enemies. Speaking of which, the Boxers had a very specific enemy in mind, reflected by a slogan that occasionally appeared on their trademark uniforms: "Protect China, kill foreigners." The Boxer Rebellion began on New Year's Eve of 1899 with the murder of a foreign missionary priest. From that moment on, attacks on foreigners and Christians of all kinds escalated. The Boxers, counting an estimated 100,000 to 300,000 soldiers and feeling reassured in their supposed invincibility after one successful campaign after another, moved north and by June 10th had reached Beijing, along the way destroying every trace of foreign influence that they could find. Buildings and railway tracks were destroyed, factories looted, communication lines cut, and other secret societies attacked. In Beijing itself, the anarchy continued. Churches were burned down and foreigners, including the German foreign minister, were killed in large numbers, with Empress Dowager Qixi openly supporting and even ordering the murder of all foreigners in the capital on June 18, 1900. This brutal massacre was only stopped by an international army consisting of 19,000 soldiers from Japan, Russia, Britain, the US, France, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. The Boxers were finally defeated, but up to 100,000 people are said to have died during the Boxer Rebellion, most of them civilians. The aftermath of the Boxer Rebellion included a number of repercussions. A 1901 peace treaty forced the Chinese government to pay reparations to 11 different nations hit by the attacks, and also saw additional trading rights conceded to foreign powers, which were now also permitted to station more troops in China than ever before, in an attempt to prevent a similar disaster from occurring again. But perhaps even more importantly, well, at least to our story, is that the Boxer Rebellion, although it ultimately failed, showed the secret societies their true potential when it came to changing the course of Chinese history. In the aftermath of the rebellion, what remained of the Yihe-chan simply dissolved, its members either returning to their old lives or joining bands of criminals or more politically than religiously motivated triad societies, pursuing the ongoing goal of finally toppling the Qing dynasty, which was now certainly on its last legs. The final nail in the coffin of the Qing came only a decade after the Boxers terrorized China and its capital, marking the end of dynastic rule and the beginning of a new era in Chinese history, one in which the Triads played a bigger and more important role than ever before. A role that they attained by clinging onto one of the most important political figures in Chinese history, Sun Yat-sen, the father of modern China. Born in 1866 into a family of poor farmers from Guangdong province, Sun Yat-sen left home at a young age, first joining his brother in Hawaii, but ultimately settling in Hong Kong, a place that would change his life forever. At the University of Hong Kong, Sun befriended a group of Triad members. Old-school Triad members who were especially passionate about good old Qing Fu Ming, and over time, Sun Yat-sen found himself harboring similar feelings towards the rulers of the Qing dynasty. His circle of friends actually included several high-ranking Hong Kong Triad members who frequently pondered the idea of utilizing the Triads to start a revolution. But Sun wouldn't become a full-blown revolutionary until 1894, when, with his newfound interest in politics, he was on his way to apply for a position as a civil servant on the mainland. During a stop in Shanghai, he encountered Chinese businessman Charlie Sung, an avid supporter of the Republican cause, who just like Sun came from southern China, was a Christian, and most importantly, a Triad member. In fact, he was a member of multiple Triad societies in Shanghai, including the Red Gang, a dominant and well-organized society involved in all kinds of criminal activities, its membership consisting of merchants, traders, financiers, and even the highly respected civil servants of China. The Red Gang was influential, and if you wanted to get anything done in the city of Shanghai back then, you probably had to be a member to even stand a chance. Charlie Sung left quite an impression on Sun, who, after being denied the chance to become a civil servant, returned to Shanghai to stay with Sung and his family. It was here that Sun Yat-sen started dedicating himself to the Republican cause, aiming to start a revolution that would put an end to thousands of years of dynastic rule in China. The plan was to start the revolution in southern China, where anti-Qing feelings were historically the highest. But in order to do so, Sun needed funds and manpower that he simply did not have. And so, he traveled to Hawaii looking for investors and recruits for his very own society, the Xinjiang Hui, or Revitalized China Society. Based in Hong Kong, the Xinjiang Hui intended to eventually recruit Triad members from all across China and unite them with bandits and peasants across the country in pursuit of a common goal, described in the 36th oath of the society's initiation ceremony. Quote, "After entering beneath the Hung Gates, I shall be loyal and faithful, and do my utmost to overthrow the Qing and restore the Ming by coordinating my efforts with those of my sworn brothers, even though my brothers be of a different profession. Our common aim is to revenge the 5 ancestors and establish a democratic government." The timing for a revolution would have been perfect, because by spring of 1895, shortly after the Xinjiang Hui was founded, China had suffered one defeat after another to the Japanese during the Sino-Japanese War taking place in the north. Smelling a golden opportunity, Sun hastily put together an army of a few thousand Triad fighters to accompany his small group of followers in an attempted coup d'etat in late October of that same year. The coup basically failed before it even started though, and with the government now well aware of his identity and intentions, Sun had to once again leave mainland China, marking the beginning of an exile that would last for 16 whole years. During this time, Sun Yat-sen was constantly on the run, but never wasted a moment, fundraising and recruiting new members which more often than not came from Triad societies that, at that point, had settled all over the globe. Macau, Hong Kong, Hawaii, the US, the UK. Sun also traveled to Singapore, Bangkok, and even French Indochina, where he managed to gain the support of important people inside the French colonial government, already quite familiar with the Triads through the French Corsican mafia, which was deeply involved in Shanghai's booming opium trade. In Japan, Sun ended up staying for 10 years between 1897 and 1907, with the help and support of the Yakuza-affiliated Black Dragon Society group of ultra-nationalists who played a huge part in setting off a chain of events that eventually led to the 1941 bombing of Pearl Harbor and Japan's subsequent entry into World War II. The Black Dragon Society's leadership, whose ultimate goal was to see the entire Asian continent fall in the hands of the Japanese, saw Sun Yat-sen as a helpful tool in the destabilization of Chinese politics and a subsequent Japanese invasion. On August 20th, 1905, Sun Yat-sen merged his Xinjiang Hui and all affiliated societies into a massive new group, the Tongmeng Hui, or United League, which contained somewhere between 50,000 to 100,000 loyal members. Merchants, landowners, students, intellectuals, former soldiers, and passionate Republicans, all of whom were eager to pursue the same goal of putting an end to dynastic rule in China. It was the Triads, however, which formed the backbone of the Tongmeng Hui, passing ideas down from the Republicans to the peasant masses that ultimately made up the bulk of the United League's membership numbers. The Triads benefited as well. Influential Republicans joined Triad societies on a regular basis, and in turn, the Triads took part in Republican rallies. The Republicans' real dirty work, like assassinations and the likes, were also now taken care of by the Triad Society's expert fighters and strategists. In short, the Triads and the Republicans of the Tongmenghui had become a tightly knit group by the early 1900s, at a time when China was more than ready for change after suffering back-to-back humiliations with the Sino-Japanese War and the Boxer Rebellion. In October of 1911, it was time for a long-awaited revolution. Sun Yat-sen's supporters participated in a series of uprisings that started in Wuchang, the success of which inspired many similar events across China. Only a few months later, the city of Nanjing had fallen, and on January 1st, 1912, the Republic of China was born. Sun Yat-sen was elected as the Republic's first provisional president, but in order to avoid a civil war, handed the post over to General Yuan Shikai only 2 months later. The revolution of 1911 might have been somewhat of a bittersweet moment. The Chinese population had pretty much agreed that the Qing dynasty had run its course at that point, and their wish of seeing it replaced by a republic was finally fulfilled. However, the establishment of a republic did not bring with it the sense of stability that the Chinese had wanted and deserved. Instead, they had another 4 incredibly difficult and incredibly violent decades ahead of them, beginning in 1916 with the warlord period, where power was divided between countless regional factions across the country. China was now, like many times in the past, a divided country. Generally, Sun Yat-sen never really acknowledged the important role that the Triads played during the revolution of 1911. But make no mistake, what Sun Yat-sen and the Tongmenghui contributed to the fall of the Qing could not have been achieved without the help of the Triads, and their support certainly did not go unrewarded either. Their involvement was no secret to the general population, and with that, their membership numbers reached new heights. Meanwhile, the highest-ranking Triad members reaped their own rewards. Important posts inside the new republic didn't only bring them closer to Chinese politics than ever before, it also forced lawmakers to turn a blind eye to their more questionable activities. With Qing Fu Ming achieved at last, and a new yet tumultuous era in Chinese history with numerous new financial opportunities around the corner, it was at this point that the secret societies started to leave their political ambitions behind, instead turning their resources and attention towards crime in order to gain more wealth and more power. Slowly but surely, the Triads were about to transform into the crime syndicates that their name is nowadays so commonly associated with. Murder, kidnapping, prostitution, and above all, opium, became the Triads' new raison d'être. And there is no person that represents this new breed of Triad societies as well as a certain Triad official from the fast-growing city of Shanghai and one of, if not the most influential mob boss in Chinese history. Du Yuesheng, also known as Big-Eared Du. Du was born in 1888 in what was probably one of the worst slums in all of China, Pudong, located just across Shanghai's Huangpu River. His upbringing was just as bad as the area that he grew up in. His mother died when he was 3 years old, and his father, only a few years after moving in with another woman, also passed away, leaving Du in the hands of his stepmother, who was one day kidnapped and sold to a brothel in Shanghai by a band of criminal Triad members. At age 10, he moved in with one of his uncles who physically abused him on a regular basis, and by age 12, Du had developed a reputation as a ruthless, tough delinquent with a love for illegal gambling. Associating with the Triads was the next logical step for Du. He joined Shanghai's Red Gang, where he was then introduced to Huang Qinrong, nicknamed Pockmarked Huang. Huang was simultaneously a chief detective of the French concession police force in Shanghai and the city's most notorious gangster. It was under the leadership of Huang, who was knee-deep in gambling and drug dealing, that Big-Eared Du was first introduced to the opium business, working as one of the Red Gang's main drug runners starting at the young age of 15. By the age of 21, Du operated a vast amount of opium dens in Shanghai's French concession himself, rising up the ranks of the Red Gang and gaining the confidence and respect of Huang, to whom he proposed the idea of merging Shanghai's 3 biggest gangs. the Red Gang, the Green Gang, and the Blue Gang. Huang agreed, but the boss of the Green Gang really saw no point in merging with his biggest rivals. It was a bad decision. It was his last bad decision. Du killed him, and subsequently became the Green Gang's new leader, which also had the convenient side effect of convincing the Blue Gang's leader, Zhang Xiaolin, to join the coalition, and his decision didn't take long to pay dividends. Soon, the Shanghai Triads controlled territory reaching all the way to Chongqing, giving them direct access to the country's most important poppy growing areas, which were essential to the production of opium. Big Ear Du's timing was impeccable. Just as he was really hitting his stride as a Triad leader, China became a republic with the help of the Triads, allowing Du to greatly expand his influence, wealth, and connections. He collaborated with the Three Harmonies Society that both Sun Yat-sen and Charlie Soong belonged to, and by the age of 30, with the help of his ever-growing opium empire and a few other savvy business ventures, he had managed to amass a fortune of an estimated $75 million in today's money. It was only the beginning of something much bigger though, because Du and the Green Gang would later go on to control basically the entire Chinese opium business, from production to sale, making him one of the richest men in all of China. Officially, he remained subordinate to his boss pockmarked Huang throughout most of his early career. But in reality, it was Du who had the city of Shanghai in the palm of his hand. He controlled local mail services, the press, parts of Chinese and foreign police forces, and at the same time extorted, threatened, and bribed his way into foreign business. He lived in a lavish mansion located in Shanghai's French Quarter, accompanied by a total of 4 concubines, addicted to his own product and virtually untouchable under the protection of his gangster buddy and chief detective Huang. When he did have to leave his mansion though, he did so in striking fashion, as described by Parks M. Coble, who recalled the arrival of Du at a Shanghai nightclub. Quote, "A carload of advanced bodyguards came and cased the cabaret from kitchen to cloakrooms, then took up stations to wait for the boss. Du himself always traveled in a large, bulletproof sedan. Behind the leader's limousine, a second carload of bodyguards traveled. Du never got out until these had surrounded him. Then, with one at each elbow, he ventured to cross the footpath and enter the cabaret where his men were posted at every door and turn. Inside, while he and his party sat at a front table, guards sat beside and behind, guns in plain view." Not surprisingly, the man who made such memorable entrances at Shanghai's nightclubs also mixed with the city's high society, including the family of Charlie Soong, the same man who discovered Sun Yat-sen in 1894. Du became close with Charlie's daughter, Soong Ai-ling, who was married to a certain H.H. Kung, owner of a banking empire which was more or less controlled by his wife's family. With these powerful connections, Du managed to negotiate a collaboration between the Green Gang and the Kung banking empire, which would last for more than 20 years, making Du an absolutely staggering amount of cash in the process. But despite his impressive net worth and powerful connections, Du was not above visiting Shanghai's raunchier corners either. One of his favorite spots to do so was a brothel called Maison Bleue, and legend has it that it was here that Big Ear Du first encountered China's next big revolutionary mind, Chiang Kai-shek. When Du first met him in 1916, Chiang came fresh off a failed revolution against the Republican government and its leader Yuan Shikai, a revolution spearheaded by none other than Sun Yat-sen and his newly established nationalist party, the Kuomintang or KMT for short, whose goal was the reunification of warlord period China. Chiang Kai-shek's dedication to the KMT undoubtedly contributed to his rapid rise within the party's ranks. However, neither he nor Du Yexiang could have possibly foreseen the speed of his ascent to leadership. The assassination of Chiang's friend, mentor, and high-ranking KMT member Chen Qimei led to a major reshuffling of power inside the party. Chiang Kai-shek became one of Sun Yat-sen's political assistants and in 1917 his military advisor and head of Sun's personal security. By 1925, he made it all the way to the rank of Chief of Staff of the Kuomintang Army, which eventually recruited around 7,000 members into its academy. The majority of them members of Big Ear Du's Green Gang, who Chiang had developed a close personal and business relationship with at that point. Chiang's big moment came that same year, when Sun Yat-sen's death and the search for a successor triggered a power struggle within the ranks of the KMT. Chiang Kai-shek was initially not considered to be a frontrunner, but it was Du and the Green Gang who made sure to change that. In August of 1925, 5 Green Gang hitmen gunned down Liao Xiongkai, the favorite to succeed Sun. A rumor was then spread, claiming that the murder was planned by Liao's main competitor, Hu Hanmin. And with that, the stage was set for Chiang Kai-shek to step into the power vacuum and become the new leader of the Kuomintang. But obviously, Du didn't go this far to help Chiang out of sheer kindness. There was one very good reason why he was ready to kill for him. In 1921, the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, was founded. And Du, from the very day that it was founded, was well aware of how much of a threat they could be to both his opium empire and the Triads as a whole. Du needed someone he was close with, and more importantly, someone with considerable political influence to stop the CCP from taking over the country and ending his endless stream of opium revenue. Chiang Kai-shek was his ticket to safety. The Communist Party, though, was a force to be reckoned with, and they moved quickly. Having gained significant influence since their founding in 1921, they were able to organize strikes and cause disorder across China pretty much as soon as Chiang took over the KMT, including the strike of approximately 800,000 workers in Shanghai, beginning on March 20th, 1927, which brought the whole city to a complete standstill. Chiang Kai-shek arrived in Shanghai 6 days later. And on April 12, 1927, the Green Gang, in support of Chiang, commenced what would later be known as the Shanghai Massacre, an unspeakably brutal purge of communist Shanghai residents which claimed the lives of at least 5,000 people. The Shanghai Massacre was, however, only the beginning of multiple years of anti-communist violence taking place across China. Ultimately, the Kuomintang ended up taking the lives of more than 1 million Chinese people, all with the help of Big Ear Du and the Green Gang. In a matter of only a few months, Chiang had conquered most of China and in 1928 set up his new government in the city of Nanjing. The Triads were about to get a big reward for their inhumane services. Unlimited criminal freedom, as long as it didn't interfere with Chiang and his plans, and once again, high-ranking government posts for its members. They became generals, staff officers, and senior civil servants. Big Ear Du reaped the biggest rewards. Chiang and his government were more or less dependent on opium revenue, and opium was, for the most part, already controlled by the Green Gang. But to further profit off the opium trade, Chiang appointed Du as the president of the Shanghai Board of Opium Suppression Bureau. Yes, you heard that right. Du Yuexiang, the biggest drug dealer in China and himself an addict, was now in control of the country's Opium Suppression Bureau. But you see, Chiang was more or less forced to set up such a bureau in the first place due to increasing pressure exerted by foreign governments who had a bit of a problem with the global impact of Chinese-produced drugs that had spread all across the globe, making it all the way to places like Paris. With Du at the helm, the opium business kept going as usual well into the 1930s. But as president of the Suppression Bureau, he now controlled the entire Chinese market, making so much money for himself and the government that foreign residents of Shanghai allegedly started referring to Chiang Kai-shek as "cash my check." Good one. Du returned the favor by investing millions into the KMT armed forces. For example, he reportedly donated a total of 120 brand new Curtiss Hawk 2 and 3 aircraft. For Chiang's 50th birthday, he was presented by the boss of the Green Gang with a plane which carried the name Opium Suppression of Shanghai. To once again quote the foreign residents of Shanghai, "A way at last has now been found to get opium suppression off the ground." Again, good one. On the surface, it actually seemed like Chiang and Du had what it took to remain as the dominant force in China for decades to come. But there was something bubbling up beneath the shiny surface of Chiang Kai-shek's government. The Communist Party, after suffering a heavy blow in 1927, was back, stronger than ever under the leadership of a certain Mao Zedong. During the so-called Long March of 1934 and 1935, which took him through 11 different Chinese provinces, Mao started gaining a significant following, including several rural secret societies. But unlike the more criminalized triads operating in major Chinese cities like the Green Gang, these rural societies in many ways retained their traditional character. You see, for China's rural population, life continued pretty much as it had been before the fall of the Qing dynasty, and their secret societies somewhat reflected this continuity. They were more interested in once again reshaping their country rather than dealing with opium and making money. All in all, the perfect followers for Mao Zedong and the CCP. To make things even worse for Chiang, 3 years earlier, in 1931, the Japanese had taken their first steps towards an invasion of China after years of purposefully spreading opium among Chinese citizens in order to weaken their will in case of an invasion. They did so not only by producing their own drugs in China, but also by buying locally, from none other than Big-Eared Du, a man who had no qualms about poisoning his own people for profit. At the same time, the economy was taking a nosedive. Inflation was high, and almost all banks in the country were at that point controlled by triads or those who sympathized with them. But for the time being, the most immediate threat was without a doubt the Japanese invasion, which had quickly developed into a second edition of the Sino-Japanese War. By 1938, Beijing had fallen into the hands of the Japanese, who had conquered most of northern China as well. Nanjing, where Chiang's government was located, was next, and eventually became the victim of one of the most infamous and inhumane acts ever committed by the Japanese army, widely known as the Rape of Nanjing. With Chiang fighting a war on two fronts, one against the communists and one against the Japanese, the situation was clear as day. Chiang Kai-shek had to, if only temporarily, join forces with the CCP in order to defend China from completely falling into the hands of the Japanese. Big-Eared Du, a man who was as far-right as it gets, vehemently advised Chiang against the collaboration with the communist forces. But the KMT and the CCP eventually put their differences aside to defend their country, until the Japanese decided to shoot themselves in the foot with the bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941. Because now, Western forces got involved in defending China against the Japanese invasion as well. But while the world was at war, the Green Gang in Shanghai was more or less undisturbed in terms of business. The opium business actually grew even bigger, and while the Green Gang now had a lot more competition on the market than they had in decades, their profits increased during the war. As for Big-Eared Du, the beginning of the Japanese invasion also meant that there were none of his police buddies in the French concession left to protect him, and by 1937 he realized that his time in Shanghai had probably come to an end. And so, he made his way to a place that for a long time had served as a safe haven for Triad members for whom China had become a bit too dangerous: Hong Kong. From here, Du was able to continue running his business empire in relative safety, at least until the Japanese invaded Hong Kong as well. But Big-Eared Du returned to Hong Kong after the end of World War II, moving all his assets there and becoming a permanent resident. The authorities in Hong Kong knew all about his shady background, but pretty much decided to just let him be. But regardless, the post-war period was when Du finally saw his political and criminal authority wither away. How Du Yuxiang spent his final years is up for debate. Some say he had a comfortable financial cushion, which allowed him to live a peaceful life in luxury. Others claim that his time in Hong Kong was much less glamorous than that. He had allegedly planned to return to China in 1951, but in August of that same year, his decades-long opium addiction finally caught up with him. Big-Eared Du passed away from an overdose at the age of 62. As for mainland China, the communists eventually emerged victorious over Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang, and in 1949, Mao Zedong officially declared the People's Republic of China, ending a century of humiliation by finally unifying the nation and giving it something that it didn't have for a very, very long time: stability. Following his defeat in the Chinese Civil War, Chiang Kai-shek led the remaining Kuomintang forces to Taiwan. He established himself as the leader of the Republic of China in exile, holding power until his death in 1975. His legacy was continued by his son, Chiang Ching-kuo, who became president of Taiwan in 1978. Notably, Chiang Ching-kuo's presidency saw the historic lifting of martial law in 1987, which served as a significant step towards democratization. As for the members of the Triad societies, those who decided to stay in China were executed in large numbers. Only a few of them actually did manage to go on with their lives even after the CCP's rise to power, some of them holding on to important government positions within the country for many years to come. For the secret societies as a whole, though, things were much different now. Opium, prostitution, and extortion were all strictly prohibited by Mao Zedong and the CCP, punished by either re-education or, much worse, execution. Traditional, non-criminal triad societies also had a difficult time ahead of them. Deemed to be socially unacceptable, most of them were forced to disband, with members fleeing to many different places around the world, like the Malay Peninsula, Europe, North America, and Australia. A whole collection of societies fled to Taiwan, where they were able to combine their forces and continue their existence, most notably under the name United Bamboo Society, or Bamboo Union. The Green Gang, much like their former leader, tried its luck in Hong Kong starting in the early 1950s. They were not able to compete with established Hong Kong gangs, never gained a foothold in the local drug market, and had completely faded away by the mid-1950s. The death of the Triad's traditional and patriotic roots and the start of a new era of crime in Hong Kong especially can be attributed to a man named Ko Tsiu Wong. Ko Tsiu Wong was a longtime Triad member and KMT official who, in 1945, was tasked with uniting Guangdong Province's numerous Triad societies into one large group that was supposed to defeat Mao Zedong and the CCP. In addition, they were supposed to cause a ruckus in Hong Kong, drive out the British, and gather all of the colony's Triad gangs under one roof, leaving it open for Du, Chiang, and their partners to take over. Now, obviously, that plan never came to fruition. But the League of Triads assembled by Ko Tsiu Wong in 1945 lives on, even to this day. They received the name Sap Se Wui, or 14 Association. Some believe that the number 14 was chosen because of the address of the original headquarters located at 14 Po Wau Road. Their name eventually changed to simply 14 before the letter K was added at the end. What the letter K stands for is up for debate. Maybe it refers to carats of gold, representing luck and wealth. Or maybe it's a reference to Kowloon, one of the 3 areas that make up Hong Kong. But whatever their name might stand for, the birth of the 14K serves as a turning point in Chinese organized crime history, continued by a new breed of triads which were ready to almost completely leave their origins behind them in order to step into a modern era of crime. Would you like to see more videos about the Triads in the future? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, a shoutout goes to all my Patreon supporters listed here, including Busner, Bobby Wu, Mark Takagi, Javier Soravia, Capybara Chuck, 2Rom, Daniel Dees, RK0, White Gilden, Justin Down, Yoko the Space Whale, Steve Matsui, Tori and Gales, and Cats and Soup. And to everyone who took their time to watch all the way until the end, thank you so much for watching. This is where I usually say sayonara, but in this case, let's go with 再见.